I'm Dick Bell of the Connecticut River Salmon Association. I'm delighted to welcome you to this, our second orientation. Any questions about procedures or anything of that nature? A number of handouts will be coming around as are appropriate. If not, we'll get right into to the heart and the meat of this program, and that is a presentation by Steve Gebhardt concerning the Connecticut Legacy Atlantic Salmon Program. This is a glimpse of our future. It's terribly important for us. We think it may be very important for you. Steve is a supervising fisheries biologist with the Connecticut DEEP in its inland fisheries division. He got us started in the salmon in the classroom business in 1995. He's been our scientific and a general consultant and advisor since then. Tremendous responsibility for this program and for all of Connecticut's good efforts in the anadromous fish field generally and specifically with Atlantic salmon. You can't get a better source of information on this species than Steve Gebhardt. So Steve, why don't you kick us off and get us started?
I didn't know we were going to be filmed today, so my presentation is going to be delayed while my makeup team arrives. I just need to be prepared for this. Let me know if I have spinach on my teeth or anything. Good morning, everyone. It's been a long time. There's a lot of familiar faces, but it's been a long time since I've seen many of you. I'm here annually, but as veteran teachers, you're not. So you've been off and sailing on your own. But as Dick indicated, we want to update you with what's going on in the salmon program. You may have read in the newspapers there are changes underfoot, and I want to explain them to you. But I also want to just sort of acknowledge your involvement in the past, not just with what you're doing with fish tanks and eggs and things, but we are aware that there was a time not that long ago with very extreme state budget problems, which the Kensington Hatchery, which is the flagship of the Atlantic salmon efforts in our state, was threatened with closure. And I know a lot of the classrooms wrote letters to the governor and elected officials and emphasized the importance of this program. And we really think it made a huge difference in keeping that facility open. So thank you for that. We really appreciate that kind of support. Well, I don't have to go into the history of the program with this group very much. You all sort of know the basics. This map shows what was going on with Atlantic salmon in New England in 1980, and you see the green rivers that were targeted for restoration, and the Connecticut, of course, is what we're involved in. And there were times when the returns to the rivers were going up, funding was good, there was a lot of federal hatcheries dedicated to this effort, but things haven't been so good in the interim. But I wanted to really emphasize how important those hatcheries are, because a lot of times fish hatcheries get a bum rap for their role. And as a biologist, I would have to say that in a lot of cases, I agree with that criticism. There are places, usually not in this part of the country, but in other parts of the country, where hatcheries are used inappropriately. There's a problem with the river, and rather than fixing the river, they just build a hatchery and pump out more fish. And the genetic identity of the fish that they're putting in the stream is not appropriate. So some of the criticisms of how we use hatcheries are legitimate. But in New England, when your salmon are completely gone and you need to produce large numbers of fish to host a restoration program, hatcheries are absolutely essential when used intelligently. So this one, it's an artist's rendition. That's the White River Hatchery up in Vermont, along the White River in Bethel, Vermont. I use the artist's rendition more than I use actual photographs because it's so big, it's hard to put the whole hatchery in one photograph. The domes up above, they're part of that hatchery as well. That's been the flagship for raising salmon for the Connecticut River program. And of course, the restoration program has been managed by the Connecticut River Salmon Commission, Atlantic Salmon Commission. We call it CRSA, so you may hear me refer to CRSA. These are the member agencies. So all of these agencies are represented on this commission, and each play a role in the program, and each have a vote on how the program is managed. You probably read in the newspapers that hatchery that I just showed you, the White River National Fish Hatchery, was not wiped off the face of the earth by Tropical Storm Irene, certainly, but it was damaged to the point where it absolutely had to be closed down. The river came up, it was about a 500-year flood in that part of Vermont. The river came up about 20 feet and ran right through that hatchery. All of those dome tanks that we keep the adult salmon in, the river ran right through it. And when it was all said and done, they went into those tanks, and a number of those tanks still had some salmon in them, but there were suckers and minnows and dace, all sorts of things. In other words, a lot of the fish that were there left, and a lot of other fish came in. There was 3 feet of mud. They had to shut down all the electrical systems because of the water. It was, in short, a disaster. Immediately after the flood, after they had secured everything and made sure that everybody got out okay, they estimated that it might take $14 million to bring that thing back in line. Subsequently, I think that that estimate has been downgraded, but it's still millions of dollars, which the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service does not have, to bring that up. So that hatchery is still not operating. They've transferred all the employees off somewhere else. There's no fish. The pumps aren't running. It's just a big old empty warehouse. So the question is, how will the restoration program go forward without that hatchery? And I'm going to just show this graph. This is the return rates of the salmon to the Connecticut River. Now, this shows 2011. Unfortunately, 2012 is not over, but the return rates for 2012 are about here. This graph, this trend now is probably pretty familiar to you. We did really well in the 80s and even in the beginning of the 90s, and then we started having this slope, this glimmer of hope, and then it's back down lower. The other thing is, last year in 2012, the Penobscot River, which has been sort of tracking the same way as the Connecticut River, they get more fish than we do, but at least the trends have been the same. It had a tremendous year last year. Their returns went way up, and so we all had our fingers crossed that maybe whatever is going on in the ocean that caused this decline maybe had turned a corner, and that we were going to see another upswing in all of New England rivers. Unfortunately, this year in the state of Maine and the Penobscot River was a disastrous run. They went right back down again. I show you this because it sort of speaks to how decisions were made. So the hatchery was destroyed. It's out of action. The return rates didn't hold promise, and also I have to say, the budget talks in Washington are not going very well. So, as of the July CRSA meeting, the Fish and Wildlife Service announced that it will no longer grow salmon for the Connecticut River program in any of its hatcheries. So the White River hatchery that I showed you was the flagship that was producing maybe 7 million eggs. But there was others. The Eisenhower hatchery in Pittsford, Vermont, the North Attleboro hatchery in Massachusetts. There were a few facilities that were involved. Fish and Wildlife Service said, we don't have the money, the results are disappointing, we just cannot do this anymore. So they didn't pull out of CRSA, and they didn't say that they'll no longer support salmon work in any manner. They just said, we're not growing any more fish, we can't afford it. So at the same time, our agency, the Connecticut DEEP, announced its intention that we want to maintain some of the salmon work in the state of Connecticut. The broodstock fishery, which you may be aware of, and if not, I'm going to briefly describe it, has been very popular, and we want to continue that. So that sort of got everybody's attention. Said, well, if they're going to do that, what else should we or can we do? If you're not familiar with the broodstock program, we have hundreds of adult salmon at the Kensington hatchery that produce eggs. They've never been to sea. They are offspring from fish that have been to sea. And we keep them for the sole intention of producing eggs because the fish that have, I showed you that graph, the fish that are coming back from the ocean are not enough to generate as many eggs as we need to support our fry stocking program. But after we've taken the eggs from these broodstock salmon, we have to do something with them. For a while, we killed them. For a while, we gave them to veterans groups. We tried releasing them to go back to the ocean. Of course, they had never been in the ocean, and they wouldn't go. There's all sorts of problems. So now we have been stocking them in the Saugatuck and Naugatuck, I should say the Shetucket and the Naugatuck rivers in Connecticut, one east, one west, and having anglers fish for them, and it's been hugely popular, and it's generated a lot of positive support for the program. So that's been a side benefit of the restoration program, and it's become so popular that our agency said, we ought to continue that on its own merits. So, based on that intent, CRSA charged its technical committee with determining what is still available. What can we do? Without White River, it doesn't appear that we can continue the way we've been continuing. So what can we do? Find out who's willing to do what and what kind of program is still possible for the Connecticut River moving forward. So a legacy program was conceived. What I've got on the screen right now was the mission statement for the restoration program that's been going on for the last practically 40 years. And you notice the key word in that first line of the mission statement is restore. Actually, reestablish a self-sustaining run of Atlantic salmon. A proposed new mission statement is this: maintain a legacy population of Atlantic salmon in the basin for public benefit, including those factors. You notice there's no indication of restore here, no indication of a wild self-sustained population. What we're saying is, with the use of hatcheries, we're going to see that some presence of Atlantic salmon remains in the population. It'll be a much smaller presence, it'll be a different presence, but there will be a presence. And I'm going to sort of describe that. So the hatchery, our hatchery in Connecticut, will reduce its broodstock population probably in half, and its egg population in half. So this is important because we're going to scale down the egg production, but because another aspect of this that is important is our hatchery program. We've only got 3 hatcheries in the state of Connecticut. There's lots of other things it needs to do, working with trout and other species. So we need to free up some space. So part of the Kensington space will continue to be committed to other species. The Roger Reed hatchery is in Massachusetts. It's a state hatchery, just like Kensington is in Massachusetts. For right now, it's going to continue the same production level that it's been doing. I add on the screen in parentheses, at least for now, the agency in Massachusetts is run by a fisheries commission, and they have to weigh in on this, and it's not entirely clear whether they will support keeping Roger Reed at full production of salmon. So the bottom line is, recently we've been able to stock about 6 million fry annually. Now we're going to stock between 900,000 and 1.2 million fry annually, and that's only if Massachusetts stays in. If the Roger Reed hatchery drops out, we'll probably be doing 200 to 250,000 fry a year just in Connecticut. So many of the streams that are now stocked will not be stocked. In the state of Connecticut, we stock, it's been a while since I've looked at the list and my memory is a little rusty, but I would gather we probably stock close to 60 streams. They're the Farmington River, the Salmon River, the 8 Mile River, and a bunch of the tributaries. We're counting, things like Salmon Brook and Dickinson Creek and Burlington Brook, things like that. A lot of these will no longer be stocked. We're going to focus the few fry that we've got left into strategic areas. Rather than spread a few fry out over everywhere, we're going to take those few fry and concentrate them in key areas of the Farmington and Salmon River watersheds. These will be streams of really good habitat. We're going to pick the best habitat. So just off the top of my head, I'm thinking Sandy Brook, Salmon Brook, Dickinson Creek, Fawn Brook. Some of these streams that we know have got really good habitat and can produce a lot of par. Those will be targeted. We will also, there's some other strategic advantages of stocking certain areas, particularly upstream of a dam that is going to be required to have fish passage. So we'll be using these fish for those purposes. I'm not able today to tell you exactly what streams we're going to be stocking. We're after spawning time, which is coming up real soon in the next couple of weeks. Our staff will be sitting down and devising a stocking plan for 2013. 2013 will probably get a heavier stocking than subsequent years because we'll then experience that drop-off in the number of brood stock. So 2013, our stocking may be down to half, and by 2014, it may be down to that that lowest level, which will be a lot less than half, maybe a lot less than a quarter. But anyway, these are some of the streams that we expect will, in the least, will be targeted. Now, I mentioned here as far as how this will affect the school program. We will probably take some of the streams that the schools have been stocking off the list. There will be some streams that we don't want salmon in anymore for reasons of not confusing anglers and others of where there are salmon and where there are not. Exceptions will be made. For example, even though we may not be stocking the main stem Salmon River, I don't imagine we're going to take that picnic area by Comstock Covered Bridge where a lot of schools stock. I don't think that's going to be taken off the list. And while we don't expect to be putting in any fish in the 8 Mile River, I know that the Lime Consolidated School is like 100 feet from the river, and they just march down and put it in, and I think that probably will be accepted too. But we're going to be working with the Connecticut River Salmon Association to look at the lists of where we're going to be stocking, and what we may do is we may set a policy saying, okay, these are the streams we want you to release your fish in, and if there are exceptions, if some school says, oh, that'll require me to change, will you allow me to stock in this stream? We'll review that on a case-by-case basis, and we may decide, yeah, where you're stocking is fine, you can keep doing that. So I don't expect that to be a tedious task. We can do that fairly quickly, determine what's still allowable. All right, so more of the features of the legacy program. Reduced stocking will begin this coming year, although it will drop off even more the following year. And based on that, reduced adult returns to the Connecticut River, I'm not just talking to the state of Connecticut now, the entire basin will begin in 2017, and it could be in the single digits. The number of adult salmon coming back to this basin will drop dramatically. Now, as you may recall, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service operates the Cronin National Salmon Station in Sunderland, Massachusetts. That's not a hatchery, really. It's a holding station. You don't want to bring wild fish from the ocean and that come up the river into your hatcheries, because if they are carrying a disease, that disease could get into that hatchery and spread through the hatchery and wipe out everything. And so this Cronin National Salmon Station is a special quarantine station apart from everywhere else, and it has a number of tanks in it, and that's where the adult salmon are held until they're ready to spawn in the fall. We have just completed spawning this year's fish up at Cronin. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has said that it is available to capture fish next year. After that, it's going to be on a year-by-year basis. A lot will depend on their budget that's developed in Washington, D.C. If their budget gets slashed, they may have to close it, or if they come up with other things for it to do. So, as long as it's available, returning salmon, at least to 2017, will be taken there, spawned, and those eggs will be brought down to Kensington. When it is no longer available, we don't know when that'll be. It seems like it's inevitable, but whether that's 2 years or 10 years, when that's closed, any returning salmon will be released at the fishways. So right now, every time an adult salmon comes back and either is captured at Holyoke, Rainbow on the Farmington River, Leesville on the Salmon River, we take possession of it and send it to Cronin. But at some point, when the numbers are, if we're getting 5 back, even if Cronin is still around, we will probably no longer take possession of them. We may tag them. We may take biological samples from them, but we'll open the gate and let them go up. Now, that's another reason for our fry stocking scheme, to put all the fry in these key areas, and key areas that for the most part fish will have access to, so that if, for instance, on the Salmon River, if we stock a lot of fry in Fawn Brook, and subsequently an adult comes back, I let them go through Leesville. They go up the Salmon River, they go up the Farmington River, I meant to say the Blackledge River, and they go into Fawn Brook and spawn. So there's a connection there between where they came from and where they're coming, as an adult salmon, so where they can get back to. So that's a key part of it, that we hope that in this legacy program there will actually be a small amount of wild reproduction of sea-run salmon still taking place, supported by the fishways. And as I mentioned before, the broodstock fishery will continue. It won't be in the Connecticut River. It will be in continue in the Shetucket and the Naugatuck River. But it's an important component of this because of the sport fishery aspect of it and the involvement of our agency. And so we would hope that the classroom program will continue. There will be some changes. We may not be able to continue to grow forever. As I mentioned, there'll be some changes in the release sites that will allow, and the timing, which we're going to talk about, and I know that may be primary on the minds of a lot of you. But we feel that this program is really important, not just to us and managing salmon in the Connecticut River, but for the education. Salmon or no salmon, our department is really committed to keeping the youth of our state engaged in natural resources, to understand it, to know about aquatic ecosystems, and to understand about the loss of species. Your lessons that you provide in this program are critically important to that. Our department is not good at that. We don't have much of a public outreach and education arm in our department. People like myself and Tim will go around and we'll talk to schools once in a while, or to clubs, but we can only hit a very few. You guys are really on the forefront of educating the young people about what goes on in the streams of Connecticut. And so regardless of the status of salmon in Connecticut, this is really important to us, and I hope it is to you. We're really grateful not only to you, but of course the Connecticut River Salmon Association for its leadership in this program. All right, so I've described the legacy program. What are the benefits? Why are we doing it? Why not just pack up and go away? If we recognize that we can't restore salmon to the program, to the watershed, why not just close the doors and leave? These are the reasons. These are the things that we hope to accomplish by maintaining this legacy program. Biodiversity is important. So 500 years ago, these streams were chock-over block full of salmon, and they played a really important role. Well, they may never be chock-over block full of salmon again, but I think it's important to maintain the species in the basin. Some of it's for ecological reasons. I talk about ecological functions. Every species plays a role in the ecosystem, and Atlantic salmon plays a role too. Bringing in nutrients, transporting mussel larvae, eating certain insects and not other insects. Salmon fits into the complexity of the ecosystem a certain way. We don't want to lose that entirely. I also mentioned in that bullet native heritage species. Atlantic salmon was really important to the Connecticut River Basin, like lobster is to the Gulf of Maine and like bison were to the Great Plains. And while we'll never have that same resource of the magnitude it had, I think it's important for our history, for our heritage, to at least have a reminder to people who come later what Atlantic salmon is all about. And then there's the genetic legacy. Our population in the Connecticut River is significantly different than any other population of Atlantic salmon anywhere else in the world. When I say different, I mean genetically. The genes, the alleles that are in this population, some of them have evolved since the time that we have been restoring it. In my program that I show new teachers, I actually show that dendrogram comparing schematically the genotype of, I should say probably more accurately, the genome of the Connecticut River population compared to the Penobscot River population from whence it came, and they're separating over time, which means natural selection has occurred. This is the southernmost population of Atlantic salmon in the world. Climate change is occurring. The genes that are being selected could be really important for the future of the species, whether it be here in the Connecticut River Basin or whether it be farther north in New England. So we feel that just maintaining this population as a living gene bank could be really important to the species in the future. Education, we've talked about education. We feel that salmon or no salmon, it is important for kids to learn about them, understand ecosystems, and understand what it is to be an endangered species and what happens when you lose a species forever. Research. Most of the Atlantic salmon elsewhere in New England are now listed under the U.S. Endangered Species Act. All the Gulf of Maine stocks are now listed. It's very hard for a scientific researcher to work with a species that's listed. If you want to poke it with a needle, if you want to trap it, if you even want to net one, measure it, and release it, you need to go through a whole lot of paperwork with the Department of Interior. That will be done in Maine, but there's a lot of things that, a lot of research that is difficult up there. Our fish down here are not listed under the Endangered Species Act because it's not a native strain. It doesn't really exist in the eyes, it's extinct in the eyes of the Endangered Species Act. So this legacy population could be very important to help researchers learn more about salmon, not only to help them in our watershed, but to help them elsewhere in the world. So we feel that's an important role we can play. Sentinel species, you know, the canary in the coal mine concept. Atlantic salmon are very sensitive, and if we've got salmon swimming in our streams, things can't be too bad. And also this idea that if sea survival does improve in the North Atlantic, how will we know? Well, we still have some fish coming and going. And then finally, the angling, the recreational aspect that I've mentioned before. So these are the reasons why CRSA has decided that it's important to maintain this legacy program even in the absence of a full-fledged restoration program. All right, a few last thoughts. For those of us who have been working on it, whether it's a biologist that, you know, stocking and spawning salmon for decades, or whether it's you as a teacher, not having a true restoration program is too bad. I think more than the general public, we recognize the potential for something really good in this basin. It's not going to happen. It was an honorable attempt. I certainly make no apologies for my support and enthusiasm for the restoration program. But it's time to move on. The second bullet I've probably already gone through more than enough. And the third bullet, I just want to make the point that I'd be interested in your opinion, but in my opinion, the fact that we no longer have an active restoration program really doesn't affect the viability of the classroom program. The next bullet makes the point a different way. Its value was never dependent upon a successful restoration. The third bullet, though, makes the point that up until now, the fry that the classes have stocked in the state of Connecticut have amounted to maybe about 1% of the total fry. With us ratcheting down our stocking in the future, at least in 2014, what you stock into the rivers may be as much as 10% of the total fish that are stocked in Connecticut. So therefore, your output can be a significant contribution to this legacy population. And then finally, I think I've already made this point that even with the demise of the restoration program, there is a educational value to this, knowing that this thing about losing species, whether it's globally or whether it's locally, is serious stuff. We've now spent a lot of effort trying to get the species back, and it appears that it's not working. So let's not repeat that mistake with another species. Let's not let, whether it's another aquatic species or a bluebird or a bald eagle, let's not let any other populations wink out, because the effort to recover them once they've gone is just enormous, and we can see the results are unpredictable. With that, I think I'll just ask for any questions you might have before we move on the agenda. Yes?
Are any of the northeastern states coordinating the salmon conservation effort with any of the Canadian Maritimes? Sharing resources, eggs, anything?
No, not really. There really is no opportunity. We
I know they have a big restoration effort there, and hatcheries and everything else.
No.
New Brunswick?
They've got one hatchery left. The Canadian government got out of the salmon business. The Canadian government version of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. And they closed most hatcheries except the Mactaquac hatchery on the St. John River. And that's sort of mandated for the power company. And as of late, they've been Canada has had some wonderful Atlantic salmon biologists, some legendary biologists, some that I've been very pleased to have rubbed shoulders with over the years. Most of those guys are gone. They've been laid off, or they've been transferred to Ottawa for mundane purposes. So there's not a whole lot going on there for the government. In some cases, they're managing fisheries. They've closed them down. But there's not a whole lot going on. But the other thing is your question about exchanging eggs and all. You can't do that anymore. It's always been difficult with fish health, because this area has this virus or bacteria and this area doesn't, so you can't switch them. But it's even more difficult now because all of Maine is listed under the U.S. Endangered Species Act, which means you cannot exchange. If you brought in outside eggs, you would be impacting the genetic identity of those. So not only can we not send Connecticut eggs, if we have a whole bunch of surplus eggs this year from the Kensington hatchery, it would be illegal for us to take those into Maine, just as it would be illegal for us to take eggs from Maine, which are listed. That salmon egg is an endangered species. We can't bring it outside of that area. Now, in Canada, while northern New Brunswick's not doing too bad, southern New Brunswick, particularly along the Bay of Fundy, is doing horrible, and it's listed under Canada's CRSA. It's called Species Risk. I forget what it stands for, but its acronym is CRSA. They're listed, especially Nova Scotia and lower New Brunswick. Anything around the Gulf of the Bay of Fundy is all listed. So they're under the same constraints of eggs coming in and out. So there's if you go to the West Coast, the Pacific salmon model of the 1960s is, hey, our hatchery can produce a lot of eggs, and so let's spread them all around. Let's just take these eggs and dump them over here, and take those eggs and dump them. Just blanket the landscape with all these hatchery eggs, and we'll have plenty of salmon. We now know that not only did it not work, it was the worst thing we possibly could have done, because we had the Deschutes River steelhead were evolved just for that river, and if you put them in the Yakima River, they don't work, and in fact they weaken the Yakima River run. And so that whole model has been discredited, and now in Atlantic salmon, we got to the point where we've got so few fish that I have to tell you, genetics drives everything in Atlantic salmon management.
Thank you.
Yes.
Can I speak to that
Yeah.
question, Steve? Just let me point out one thing that's a great advantage of the Connecticut River Salmon Association. We are a part of the federation of organizations which form the Atlantic Salmon Federation. That's the largest private conservation group directed towards salmon in the world. It is actually two companies, one Canadian, one American, which work in tandem and work side by side. All of the research that's done in Canada is instantly available and filters through that organization. All policy decisions affecting legislative initiatives filter through that organization, and we're plugged directly into that. We produce a director of that organization through this affiliation. So we're well connected with as much that goes on in Canada as we can be.
I think that's a good point, and that speaks to the NGOs, and we're sort of the same way. I certainly didn't mean to imply we don't talk, we don't learn. We do, the scientists from the US and Canada and Europe, through NASCO and others, there's a lot of communication. It's just your question to me seemed to be asking more about sort of physical logistics of actually sharing resources. So we share a lot of information, we don't share a lot of resources.
Could you clarify one thing?
Yeah.
The changes in the availability of stocking sites are not going to be implemented this year. Am I correct in that?
I can't make that guarantee.
Oh, okay. So we may hear about that.
My guess is this year, if there are any, they will be modest.
Okay.
The more larger changes will come next year.
Okay. And in discussing those larger changes, the thing that makes some of those sites unique is the fact you can get buses into. That's going to be taken into account.
Well, I'll tell you what. Nothing's going to be done without consultation with your organization,
right.
And so we know those, and that's a lot of what I said about the Salmon River is in that.
Okay.
Yes.
When you say that the Connecticut River population has diverged genetically from the Penobscot stocks, do we have any idea whether that's related to adaptation to the river or it's genetic drift because the population's so small?
No, we don't know that. I mean, that's a good question. We know that it's changed. We like to make the assumption that it has been adaptive, and so
So someone might be able to take a look at that?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's sort of a hard thing to test, but yeah. So there could be genetic drift. It could be random, but yeah, we would hope. One of the things that's sort of unique about the Connecticut River, of course, is that it's south of Cape Cod. Most Atlantic salmon home to rivers north of Cape Cod where the water is a lot colder. Anything that comes back here has to round Cape Cod and get into Long Island Sound, which is a lot warmer, and I suspect there's been a lot of natural selection there. Some fish, whether they run late or they're not as suitable, they're not well suited for warmer water, we never see those fish. So no, that's geez, it sounds like you took some fish courses once in a while. Yes, Craig.
Just real quick in layman's terms, can you explain why this drop off and what is the, maybe you did, and
You mean the drop off in returns?
Yeah.
I can't with a great deal of satisfaction because we don't know for sure.
But just in purposes of us as being teachers and working with potential sponsors to keep this program going, why are we seeing?
I can tell you it's at sea. I mean, it has nothing to do with the freshwater habitat. You know, maybe I'm glossing over that. Clearly, there are always problems in freshwater. Our watersheds have been dammed. There's still some pollution. There's always issues in freshwater. But keep in mind that if you think about that graph, I won't bring it back, but you saw that graph. The returns were going up, 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 and then it went down. Right now, the freshwater environment in Connecticut is a hell of a lot better than it was back in the 80s. We have fewer dams, we have cleaner water, we have a better habitat. Our agency, NGOs, conservationists have done a whole lot to improve the Connecticut River watershed since 1986. Yet, it's gone down. Meanwhile, that graph, that trend I showed you, has been duplicated not only in every river in North America, including in the North Shore of Quebec, which is wilderness. There's no dams up there. But that trend has been duplicated in Europe. So clearly, it's something common to all salmon rivers. Well, what is that? It's the Atlantic Ocean. And if you've been reading about the North Atlantic, we've really screwed it up. You know, the groundfish are gone. The cod was the keystone species of the North Atlantic. It's commercially extinct. There's lots of things going on out there. Then add climate change. So that's why I say, Craig, I don't have a good answer. As a scientist, would love to find a smoking gun, do experiments, and prove that it's this, and then we can solve that. We're not at that place, but we know that it's out in the ocean. We know it's affecting everybody, and that's where we are. Yes.
Do they look at the temperature variations? I mean, with the climate change, you're talking about freshwater rivers and that. Have they connected the drops in that to any kind of temperature change varies over the years or not?
No, I mean, the temperatures have been changing, but keep in mind, temperature change in the Connecticut River would be critical because we're at the southern extent of the range. There never was salmon in the Hudson or farther south. And so if it gets warmer, our river is going to be most at risk. So there's no doubt about it. And our return rates have always been lower than everybody else's. That's to be expected. Our native strain is gone, and we're in the southern extent of the range. But keep in mind, the Miramichi River, to pick out a river, it's in the middle of New Brunswick. It's probably the leading producer of salmon in North America. It's so far up there that if you had a 1 or 2 degree rise, it would probably increase the production because it's cold. You would actually increase the growing season maybe by a week, and so you're growing more part. Because that's one of the things about down south. We may have problems being in the southern extent of the range with the warm Long Island Sound and everything, but boy, can we grow young salmon. I mean, we send out a smolt out of the Farmington River in 1 year. It takes 1 year to produce a smolt in the main stem of the Farmington River because we've got all these insects and we've got this long growing season. So now, if you think about if it was just temperature, the production of salmon in those upper latitudes should be increasing, and they're not. So it's a little more complex. We are monitoring water temperature. Ask me a question about water temperature, I can tell you, but we can't link it as the causative agent of decline of salmon in North Atlantic.